Remember this image. A 7-year-old girl hides in a wood and sees her father kiss a young woman who is not her mother, not his wife. This is where it began, really, for the girl.
I did idolise him. I did have him on a pedestal. He is that type of person.
But Sam's father was to abuse her love for him. A few years later, her parents' bedroom, her mother's shredded dress, a farewell note.
So many different stories told to so many different people, a web of lies.
The apparently tranquil seaside town of Bournemouth, where a childhood ended, where there was murder, but where beneath layers of deceit, little was as it seemed.
The problem with fantasists is that they get caught up with all the lies they've told, and they forget that the truth is still the truth. And no matter how much you bury it, it can still find its way to the surface.
The stolen kiss in the woods was in 1976. Samantha Gillingham, then 7, is grown up now, married, with a 21-year-old son of her own. Then she was an only child living with her parents, Russell and Veronica Packman. Hers was an unsettled childhood. The family dynamics held many clues to what was to come.
Personality-wise, my father was very extrovert and cocky, but I thought that my father was just the bee's knees, really, as far as fathers were concerned. My mother was nothing like my father. My mother was stunning. I wouldn't say a trophy wife is the correct way to actually put it, but certainly somebody that was attractive, had a nice figure, and maybe somebody who was submissive. I was never close to my mother, though. There wasn't ever a mother-daughter bond.
Russell's own upbringing was disturbed. Nicknamed Flash Harry because of his liking for Rolex watches, an admirer of the glamour surrounding the Cray brother gangsters, he had convictions for robbery in GBH and spent time in Borstal. But he later embarked on a successful career as a draftsman in the aviation industry.
My father had absolutely no qualifications in this line of work. He'd quite literally blagged his way into this business, becoming very good at it. He obviously was very good at it because it financed a very nice life. But on top of that, he then took my mother into the industry as well and taught my mother.
In those days, Russell and his wife were a tight team. Looking after Sam was fitted around their careers. When she was 7, they went to Germany for work.
My parents literally just found a school and they just left me there. And I can remember I was very, very distraught. I was completely abandoned, foreign country, foreign language.
In 1977, when she was 9, they relocated again, this time to Canada. Sam had little contact with anyone save her parents.
My father put a huge amount of energy and effort into me. You know, my father and I dancing, you know, playing for hours upon hours. I constantly had this urge to please him, to become his, I did idolise him. I did have him on a pedestal. He is that type of person where you want his approval.
Being idolised was important to Russell. In many ways, his household was his fiefdom.
If you did something wrong in the house, you used to have to do bow downs. It was literally down on your hands and knees. You'd literally have to do this bow down movement. Bow downs is definitely a controlling thing.
Last chance.
If I didn't eat my food, the plate was just put on top of my head. I can remember my mother having to take me upstairs to the bathroom to rinse food out of my hair.
There are aspects of this which are really disturbing. Here's a young girl with no friends who's desperate for her father's love, but he's indifferent to her most of the time and throws her a few kind of crumbs now and again, which she desperately clings on to. The mother and the daughter are both kind of bit part players in his fantasy. He's someone who's prepared to use other human beings for his own psychological gratification.
He forced his wife to cut off all communication with her family, and he didn't like her name, Veronica.
She changed her name to Carol Ann, and my father's sister, her name is Carol Ann, so it is quite strange, really.
Russell, with his record of violence, knew how to deal with those who crossed him.
We had a German Shepherd, and the dog became ill, was messing hugely in the house. I woke up to the most horrendous of fracas going on, and I can remember coming out from my bedroom door to find just this mess. And the next day, I can remember my father saying to me that unfortunately, you know, that Panda had been very ill, and yes, well, I'm sorry to say, but Panda's now, he's gone to heaven. Well, actually, what actually transpires is that my father had quite literally kicked that dog to death.
In the 18th year of their marriage, now back from Canada and with their daughter aged 15, Russell and Carol bought a home in Bournemouth. Things were to happen here which make it hard for Sam to return.
This is Ipswich Road. In the past year, I've been back here quite a bit, but I only normally stand at the bottom of the driveway. And this is the last place where I lived as a family, together with my parents.
A fourth person appeared on the scene. Patricia Causley was an employee at Russell's new insurance business.
Patricia was older than me, but younger than my parents. Very bubbly.
This is Patricia. This is Sam.
My father says that Patricia needed somewhere to stay, and it was just a temporary thing. And this is where Patricia stored her furniture, but of course, Patricia's furniture never did get moved out because Patricia never moved out.
All the characters were now assembled. Nightmare was about to descend. Russell Packman had brought Patricia Causley into his family's Bournemouth home and soon was training her in aviation draftsmanship, as he'd done with his wife. It became clear they were having an affair, but for his daughter Sam, Patricia, who was only 12 years her senior, felt like an older sister.
Was somebody who was more in tune with fashion, as it were, and accessories, and my mother wasn't like that. My mother wasn't that sort of person. And so Patricia kind of became my pal as well. So now I had my father as a pal, and I had Patricia as well. Patricia moved into my room, and my father moved out of the matrimonial bed, and he moved then into the spare room. And because my parents were now sleeping separately, I didn't really think there was anything really weird. Patricia sneaking out of my room and sneaking into my father's room. Unfortunately, I was kind of used as like a pawn, really, in my father's relationship with Patricia. My mother was desperately continuing as life was, despite the fact that this other woman was living in her home.
Sam's complicity went further. She actively protected Russell and Patricia as they had sex.
My father and Patricia were in bed together while I was stood at the window looking out to protect them, to make sure that my mother, when she was coming back, that they wouldn't get found in bed together. It just sounds so flipping perverted now. You don't realise what you're doing when you're that age. You don't realise. I do understand, though, that I was exploited in some ways for my naivety, though, my loyalty to my father. No loyalty to my mother.
There were other disturbing hints of perverse sexuality in topless photos Russell took of Sam as a child, echoing a photo of his wife.
It's the way that he's got me to actually hold my hair up. So it's not just a case of just a photograph of, oh, well, this is what you looked like when you were 13, how you were developing. There was definitely an element of the sexual.
Patricia's arrival coincided with a change in Russell's sexual habits.
He started to shave underneath his arms and his legs.
For a time, it seems Carol may have tried to meet his needs.
My father started to wear French knickers, silk French knickers, which my mother used to buy. With regards to Patricia, the driving force was definitely sexually motivated. Patricia was obviously giving my father something that my mother obviously wasn't giving him after a marriage of 20 years.
I think in Patricia, Russell found somebody he really needed. He needs someone to fuel his narcissistic fantasies of who he is, and he needs someone to fulfill his sexual fantasies as well.
There's a photo that I saw of my father, and you just think to yourself, he's in this picture that I've seen. He's in a cot, and it's full-grown man in a normal cot, wearing a nappy with a dummy in his mouth.
The roots of Russell's strange sexual behaviour may lie decades earlier. One incident in particular may have affected him.
We don't know if this is true or not, but he says that he was actually raped by a friend of his father. I don't know. I think that he felt that with his father, that his father hadn't supported, hadn't believed him.
So what do we know about Russell at this stage? Well, we know that he's completely into control. But of course, very, very hard to stay in complete control all of the time. And the whole dressing as an infant is about not being in control, about allowing someone else to be in charge of what's going on. And of course, this could be connected to his rape when he was 17. Because if you've ever been raped, of course, the last thing you want to do is allow someone else to control you in that way. But of course, this dressing in French knickers and so on, the kind of feminine side of his behaviour, might also connect to the rape in a very different sense, which is what happens if that rape was much more consensual.
In late 1984, Russell won a new work contract in Yorkshire. He took both Carol and Patricia with him. Sam, aged 16, was left to fend for herself. One day, her mother travelled back to check everything was okay.
She started to actually confide in me with regards to the situation that she was in Yorkshire, with Patricia being there. And it was the first time, really, that my mother and I had actually spoken.
Since she was 7, Sam had kept a secret from her mother. She, Russell, and a teenage girl, Sonia, had been walking in woods, playing hide-and-seek.
I stepped out from the bushes and I looked back and I saw my father kissing Sonia.
Now, finally, she told her mother Russell's infidelity with Patricia was not his first.
But please, please don't tell him. We promise. You know what he's like.
Okay. Anyway, she goes back up there, they have a row. My mother, of course, has got some ammunition that she can use against my father, and of course, she uses it, and the next thing is that I receive my phone call that evening.
Hello?
You are in serious trouble when I get home.
She promised. She said that she wouldn't tell you.
Well, she has told me, and you are going to pay.
Dad, I'm sorry.
I had no further nightly phone calls. I was literally just left in complete silence and fear. My father just came straight up the stairs to my bedroom, just opened up the door. He came in and he had like a hard-soled leather slipper, and he hit me and he hit me.
Stop it!
And he said, right, we'll start again. He started hitting me again. And when he finished, he just threw me across the room. And my father said to me to go down the stairs and go and show Patricia. Patricia? Why the fuck? Sorry, but why Patricia?
Next morning, Sam was sent to fetch the papers.
So I walked to Westbourne. I was in absolute agony. I just had horseshoe ring marks all on my buttocks, down the backs of my legs. I just came home. My mother said to me there was a cup of tea in the pot if I wanted one. She didn't even ask me how I was. She just took my father up his tea and toast. I just ran away the next day.
Sam fled to Bournemouth seafront. There she met a friend. Police and social services were called, and she was taken into a children's home. That's where she spent Christmas 1984.
My mother came to see me in that time as well. It wasn't very good. I was never close to my mother, though. There wasn't ever a mother-daughter bond.
I don't think I love you anymore.
Though Russell was charged with actual bodily harm, he persuaded Sam to say both parents had attacked her, making it harder to pin specific blame. The charge was dropped and she was sent home.
I loved him dearly. Despite what he'd done to me, I wanted to go back home again. But I should have maybe gone down a different road. And then maybe then what happened then wouldn't have happened.
Isolated and rejected from all sides, Carol hit rock bottom.
I can remember one particular incident where my mother, she was on the kitchen floor and she was literally just wailing, I wouldn't say crying, I would just say just wailing like an animal. And my father got a bucket of water and he took the bucket of water and he poured it onto my mother. And I was trying to get my mother to get her up the stairs so that she could be put to bed. Because she was that's where she needed to go. It's just terrible that somebody could be in such a, mentally, just to be so desperate and for nobody to help her. I know I helped her to try and get up the stairs, but the whole situation, though, she needed bigger help than that.
The mother is systematically being destroyed here. She desperately needs help. She needs love and support, but nobody's going to her aid. Now, can we understand this from a psychology point of view? Well, we know that Sam has, in some sense, thrown her lot in with her father. She's identified with him. She knows how powerful he is, and we know that powerful figures draw in support in this way. She doesn't want to cross him because, in every sense, she knows what he's capable of. He's capable of emotional, mental, and physical abuse, and she doesn't want to be on the wrong side of him.
Carol stuck it out for a few more months. But on June the 14th, 1985, she told her doctor she was separating from her husband and visited her solicitor to discuss divorce and her financial position. She told a friend she'd sooner burn the £40,000 house than let Patricia have her 50% share in its value. The next day, Russell's solicitor, Anthony Hackett-Jones, received a letter from him saying Russell intended to divorce Carol, but she was being difficult.
So at this point, Carol has picked herself literally up from the floor. She's going to do something about it. She's taking charge of her life again. But the problem is that in this household, when you go against Russell's will, that can be a very dangerous thing to do.
The exact date of what happened next is not clear.
My father and I were going to London to do some sightseeing. I don't remember leaving the house, the journey to London. I do remember being in London, and I remember seeing Patricia at the window of the car, but I don't remember the actual journey back.
Memories of what she found on return are crystal clear.
I remember exactly going into the house, went into the kitchen, and there on the work surface was my mother's wedding ring and a note.
I've had enough. I can't take it anymore. Take care of yourself. Mum.
I ran straight up the stairs to my parents' bedroom because I obviously wanted to see how gone was gone. The wardrobe doors were all open. There was a cocktail dress of my mother's in red, and the dress had been shredded.
No clothes or belongings were missing.
But she hasn't even taken anything.
I think initially I felt indifferent, which I know sounds terrible, but there was it was almost as if that we had been living in a pressure cooker and that the pressure had been released from the house.
On June the 21st, 1985, Russell reported Carol missing, but made it clear he wasn't worried.
My father's reaction was, she's just seeking attention, she'll be back.
A new normality asserted itself. Russell insisted Sam get a job, which she did, as a chambermaid in the Tralee Hotel, now a travel lodge. And in the evenings, she, Patricia and Russell had civilised meals together.
My mother had now gone, and nobody seemed to be particularly interested in where she might be and was she coming back. But it didn't take long for my father's relationship and mine to actually deteriorate.
I actually think it's time you moved out. You know, got a place of your own.
Fine.
It's almost as if she's just surplus to requirements now.
That's it.
Please don't go, Sammy, not like your mother did.
She was useful to the father earlier on in the war of attrition against the mother, as a useful ally, as a lookout, as someone who worshipped him, and he needed that affirmation from her constantly. But now she just reminds of him of an earlier life. He's got a new life now with Patricia, and she's no longer necessary.
The next day, Sam returned for her belongings.
My father was stood at the top of the steps. I said to him, your wife's left you, your daughter's now left you, and hopefully she'll see sense and leave you as well. You end up a sad, lonely old man. All I actually wanted was for everybody just to come home and just for it all to be okay. It wasn't okay.
Sam had nowhere to go. She was on her own. For Russell and Patricia, life would soon take an unexpected and dramatic twist. Following the disappearance of her mother, relations between Sam and her father Russell and his lover Patricia had deteriorated. She walked out.
This is Bournemouth Pier. The day that I left home, this is where I came to. This is actually underneath the pier, and this was somewhere else where you could actually come, where you would be safe, you'd be dry and warm. And, you know, yes, there were other people that were underneath here, but they never caused me any harm at all.
Sam lived by eating and washing at the hotel where she worked. But the 16-year-old drifted into a cycle of partying, drugs and shoplifting. She lost her job and ended up on Social Security. She met her future husband, who was then a heroin addict, and they stole Russell's checkbook to buy cars and bikes. By September 1986, both were in prison. Sam rarely saw her father, but released from jail, she visited him and Patricia at Christmas 1987.
I said, have you heard anything about my mother at all? And there was just this momentary silence. It's just a fractional second where things just stop.
Well, yes, she just walked into a police station, said that she was fine and didn't want any more to do with us.
It was just question, answer, okay, fine, I just accepted it.
Later, Sam told Russell she'd try to find her mother.
My father said to me, if you continue to try and find your mother, I will never speak to you again.
I'd like some information, please.
Certainly, madam. What's the name, please?
Caroline Packman.
By 1989, now married, Sam had lost touch with her dad, but she was pregnant and wanted to let both parents know. She did try to trace her mother through the police without success. Russell had adopted Patricia's surname Causley so as to appear married to her and changed his number. Police managed to trace him nevertheless and asked him to call Sam.
Dad?
What do you want?
I thought you might like to know you're going to become a grandfather. Dad?
I can't talk to you right now, Sam. I don't want to know anything about it.
It?
The it is now 21, named Neil after his father.
It is quite hard to understand why someone would call you it, or, you know, why he wouldn't want anything to do with, you know, with something that's his own flesh and blood.
Sam refused to give up. Believing Russell would after all be happy to meet his newborn grandchild, she went to visit.
Hello.
He was wearing this peach-coloured jumper, which seemed quite shocking. It was just such an effeminate colour. I went there to try and just talk to him, and he just freaked me completely.
You're always banging on about Mum. You've no idea about Mum.
You don't need to tell
Mum is
me.
useless.
My father just started going on about my parents' sex life.
Rubbish. In bed, she was frigid
You
and
don't need to
rigid
tell me
between
this.
the sheets.
I thought it was the most weirdest thing, and then he slammed his hands down on the table and he said, you know, well, fuck you. And I slammed my hand down on the table back. I said, no, fuck you. Got up and I just out.
Why did he talk so inappropriately? Well, there's a way of constructing himself to say, look, I'm an odious human being. It might have been a way of directing her out the door, pushing her away. Why would he do that psychologically? Because in some sense, she's moved on in her life now. He might still want that affirmation from her. He's not getting it now because she's with a new partner.
For the next 4 years, Sam became engrossed in bringing up her child and dealing with a sometimes turbulent married life. Then out of the blue, she received a visit from the police which would change her life forever.
They said, well, we have some bad news for you. And I have to say, it just turned my world just completely upside down.
20th of October, 1993. Sam was told Russell, his solicitor Anthony Hackett-Jones, Patricia and another woman had hired a yacht from Hamble near Southampton. They'd sailed to St. Peter Port on Guernsey in the Channel Islands and had lunch beside the marina. That evening, they'd set sail again for France. At 12:36 a.m., the Coast Guard had received an SOS call saying, "Man overboard." The person who'd made the call was Patricia.
Can you give us some details, please? How long has the person been over at the side?
What did you say, sorry?
How long has the person been in the water? How long?
We're not sure, but we think half an hour, maybe an hour, we don't know.
The lifeboat was launched, and by 4 o'clock in the morning, 3 of the 4 original occupants of the boat were in hospital on the island. Russell was nowhere to be seen. 2 hours later, Philip Faller of Guernsey Police, then a sergeant, now a chief inspector, was handed the case.
At first, I really wasn't that interested in getting involved in this, but actually, as I started to talk to the people involved, that really brought about a gut reaction, a gut feeling about things that weren't right. This started to unravel into a bit of a mystery, something that became all-engrossing for me.
Sergeant Faller went to see the 3 boat occupants in hospital.
I noticed Mr. Hackett-Jones was making some notes on an A5 notepad, writing down some figures. I then moved on further down the ward and spoke with Patricia.
I just feel so desperate and so upset.
Her reactions seemed to be completely over the top, banging her head on the table. She started off by making it quite clear that she was Russell Causley's wife and that they were married. And I'd actually noted that, written that down in the statement.
The detective asked the solicitor whether he'd kept the yacht's log up to date while on board.
He said that he hadn't, but that he had written his own notes, which were made at the time during the course of the journey, and produced this A5 pad showing coordinates, which I believed at that time were the figures that he was writing when I came into the ward.
At midday, the search for Russell was called off. Many questions remained unanswered by the boat's occupants.
Whilst at the hospital, I'd arranged to meet them the following morning at about 10 o'clock here at Moores Hotel, which is where they stayed overnight. I'd actually got here about 8 o'clock that morning because I wanted to meet up with somebody from the Hamble Yacht Club to discuss some detail about the yacht itself, which was moored in St Peter Port Harbour. But to my complete surprise, I found all three of them coming out this door here with their luggage, going towards a waiting taxi.
The solicitor explained they were catching a flight home, despite the continuing search for Russell.
They said they didn't really want to speak with me, got into the taxi turned around here and went off down the hill.
Highly suspicious, he asked his boss if he could arrest the three before they boarded their flight home, but was told any offence would have occurred outside Guernsey jurisdiction. The state of the yacht when it was rescued had also aroused suspicion. John Webster was the lifeboatman who brought the vessel, the Talon Noir, to land. What he found on board the boat, similar to this one, did not suggest the occupants were genuine sailors.
The autopilot hadn't even been switched on. The VHF radio was on an obscure channel, and they seemed to be having difficulty in using it. The Talon Noir's ropes were just thrown over the rails, and they were still hanging there, as with the fenders over the side of the boat. An admiral once said, a boat at sea with a fender out is like a lady going to a ball with her curlers in.
Sam might never have had the visit by police a week after the incident without a chance event in the life of her Auntie Carol, Russell's sister.
This is what I wanted to show you.
A friend showed the aunt a news article about a Mr. and Mrs. Causley and a drowning accident. The aunt thought Guernsey police should know Patricia was not Russell's real wife and that there was a daughter, Sam.
I'd like to speak to Inspector Fowler, please.
Sam's Auntie Carol phoned me and said that, in actual fact, Carol was Russell's wife, and this was totally contrary to what Patricia had told me in her statement at the hospital.
And they said, well, your father is missing, presumed dead at sea. I was just absolutely devastated. I obviously desperately needed to speak to Patricia because she was there and I just wanted information as to what had happened. And I started to find out stuff about that there's sea plates and that bodies could go underneath sea plates and they wouldn't be able to get out. And it's just absolutely horrific, the things that go through your mind, that somebody has drowned.
But when Sam finally got hold of Patricia, days later, she learned little.
Well, it's my dad. I've lost my dad.
It's my husband. My husband. I've lost my husband.
He's not your husband. He's still married to my mum.
Oh, look, Sam, I've got my own grief to deal with.
Deeply suspicious, Sergeant Fowler had already placed insurance companies on alert for claims relating to the yachting incident. Sure enough, claims began rolling in, lodged by the solicitor, Anthony Hackett-Jones, on behalf of Patricia. Some were passed to John Saunders, fraud investigator. The claims totalled around £850,000.
Russell Causley was allegedly buying a very expensive property near Harrods. He'd applied for a large mortgage, and the insurance policy he'd applied for was to cover the mortgage. And I thought perhaps it was a ruse to obtain a large life insurance policy without maybe too many questions being asked. Literally hours before he went sailing, Hackett-Jones asked for the life insurance policy to take immediate effect. That's unusual because normally in such circumstances, the policy would not take effect until the mortgage was finalised and the purchase finalised.
Convinced the death had been faked, the insurance fraud investigator and the detective went to see Sam. She refused to believe Russell would put his family through such pain.
I have to say, at that point, I was quite offended by as to what he said, but because I just couldn't believe that my father was actually capable of committing a fraud to fake his own death for life insurance payouts.
But John Saunders found most people thought the opposite.
No one seemed to really believe that he had died. People seemed to think it was one of his little tricks, one of his little scams. He appeared to have a reputation. What was interesting, I spoke to a jeweller in Bournemouth who said that now that if Russell Causley was dead, then he'd lost a valuable customer. It transpires that Most years when Russell went on holiday, he appeared to lose a gold Rolex, and the insurance company replaced it via the jeweller, which was ironical in that Patricia Causley also submitted a claim for the jewellery, and I think it was also a gold Rolex, that he was wearing when he allegedly fell overboard from the yacht.
John Saunders and Sergeant Fowler questioned Patricia. Once again, she displayed extreme emotion.
She wept throughout the interview, and I didn't believe a word she said. In fact, the following day I received a phone call, I think it was from her doctor, saying that she was very suicidal. If she should kill herself, then I would be held responsible. Well, that was ridiculous.
The fraud squad in London took over the inquiry, but Sergeant Fowler continued working on the case in Guernsey.
I spent a lot of personal time on this inquiry, and there were people that constantly reminded me that I was probably getting it wrong, but I would often come out here walking and come to this particular place here where, looking out, is the actual location where Russell would have had his accident being lost at sea.
You start to realise the man that you've idolised for such a long period of time isn't the man that you thought that he was.
Investigators were convinced Patricia would lead them to Russell. 4 months after the yachting incident, the pair were observed rendezvousing in a pub. Perhaps fearing they were being watched, they left separately. Patricia drove off, but Russell left on foot to be met by waiting police officers.
I was naturally delighted, but I had a strong urge to go and have a few words with Patricia Causley about her suicidal tendencies.
It emerged on the day of the incident, Russell had caught the ferry to the mainland while the others went out on the yacht. He'd then gone to ground in Brighton, living as a woman. The full extent of the fraud became clear. On top of the yachting scam, there were false claims for a robbery at home, plus thousands of pounds worth of lost luggage. In March 1995 at Southwark Crown Court, Russell admitted conspiracy to defraud and was sentenced to 2 years. Patricia was given a 1-year suspended sentence. Russell's solicitor, Anthony Hackett-Jones, against whom the Causleys testified, was given 3 years. The weight of the law coming down harder on someone paid to uphold it.
I honestly think that he thinks to himself, well, I wasn't dead, was I? So what's your problem? You know, I'm alive and well now, get over it. But he doesn't understand mentally just what damage that actually does to you.
To Sergeant Fowler, this wasn't the end of the case. He was determined to find out what had happened to Sam's mother. Russell Causley was in prison, but the investigators hadn't finished. Sergeant Phil Fowler of Guernsey Police was increasingly suspicious about the disappearance of Russell's wife, Carol.
The more I looked into where she might be, the more it seemed that she no longer existed.
The last confirmed sighting was the visit a decade earlier to her solicitor, inquiring about a divorce.
I made inquiries with the Passport Office, Register for Births and Deaths, her own medical records, lots of inquiries with Canada, Italy, Germany, through her old work colleagues.
Sam helped police with their search.
If you leave a footprint, no matter what it is that you're doing, and one by one, we couldn't find any record of my mother.
Phil went to interview Patricia.
Patricia had mentioned that some 3 years previously she'd spoken with Carol, but I more specifically asked where I could perhaps find Carol at that moment in time, at which point Patricia turned to me and looked me directly in the eye and said, "To be honest with you, Sergeant Fowler, I don't think you will ever find Carol." And for a moment, that stunned me because that was quite a chilling statement to make.
Dorset police took up the case, working with Sergeant Phil Fowler. It emerged a mother and daughter claiming to be Carol and Sam had gone to a police station to say that Carol didn't want to be found.
Of course, I was daughter, and I, for a fact, had not been into the police station with my mother.
It was never proven who that woman was. However, Patricia had previously pretended to be Carol to get a permit to work with Russell in the aviation industry in Canada after the disappearance. Colleagues who'd known the real Carol rumbled the deception, informed the mounted police, and the couple fled back to Bournemouth.
Patricia also disguised herself as Carol at a firm of solicitors in order to change the name on the deeds to the house over to Patricia from Carol. And this then meant that Patricia had every right to the house jointly with Russell.
Whoever investigators spoke to among Russell's acquaintances, a different account had been given to explain Carol's disappearance.
To some it would be that she's now in Germany, to others that she was now working in Canada, Italy. With some it would be that she's gone off with another man. It seemed to me that he lived a life of deceit and fakery, really. So many different stories told to so many different people, a web of lies.
Investigators were convinced that the secret Russell was hiding was that he had killed Carol.
We could prove that Carol no longer existed, and there was mounting suspicion and increasing evidence that she'd been murdered. But at that stage, we had insufficient to charge anybody with her murder.
It was Russell himself, perhaps through his inability to resist concocting fanciful stories, who sealed his own fate. It emerged that whilst in jail, he'd boasted to 3 fellow inmates about murdering his wife. The first conversation at Brixton Prison was with Michael Lamond.
Russell was asked why he was on remand, to which he told him that it was for fraud. But then he went on to say that, thank God it was for fraud and nothing else. And when pressed on the point, Russell then went on to explain that he'd killed his wife and that arranged for her body to be buried in a cemetery, in a freshly dug grave.
Scientists from Bournemouth University probed graves in local cemeteries but found no evidence to back the claim. The second conversation was at Ford Open Prison near Arundel in West Sussex, where Russell approached an inmate called Murphy.
Knowing that he had some knowledge of the effects of acid, he'd asked him whether or not acid would burn away bones. Murphy felt that acid wouldn't affect human bones, to which Russell responded that the acid that he'd used would have been strong enough to completely dissolve any trace of any human body. He said that it was painless for her because he gave her a shot of gas, put a plastic bag over her head, and then dissolved the body completely, right down even to any traces of hair.
The final conversation was at Exeter Prison. Russell spoke to an inmate called Briggs.
He said that he had chopped the body up with an axe and then put the body parts into plastic bags and then disposed of them down a mine shaft in the New Forest. There was now finally unignorable evidence to charge Russell with the murder of his wife. And on the day of his release from prison, after serving his sentence for the fraud, the police were waiting, took him in, and later charged him with the offence.
11.5 years after Carol's disappearance, Russell Causley stood trial at Winchester Crown Court. He denied murder.
I was petrified. I had to give evidence against this man. It's very difficult to have to do that when your father is sat there in the dock, smirking at you whilst you're actually doing this. And believe me, when I gave evidence against my father, I was absolutely trembling.
In December 1996, without ever revealing how he killed Carol and what he really did with the body, Russell was convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment. In 2003, on the basis that the inmate's evidence was unsound, he won a retrial. But the following year at Exeter Crown Court, with the inmate's evidence excluded, he was again convicted of murdering Carol by a unanimous verdict on circumstantial evidence alone. But many questions are left for those this inquiry touched.
I'd want to have a man-to-man conversation with him, nothing to do with policing. I'd want to talk to him as a father to father and try and understand why it is to this day he can't speak with his own daughter, why he can't tell her what really happened. I mean, after all, he's served or serving his sentence. But why can't he, as a human being, as a father, bring himself to speak with Samantha and tell her exactly what happened?
As he said, and I quote from my grandfather's lips, if he knew how much of a pain and how much of a bitch my mother would have been, he would have got rid of her as well at the same time. He was just a selfish, greedy man that only wanted what he could get. He didn't care who he hurt in the process or what he'd done to get it. And, you know, that was achieved by killing my grandmother. He had a beautiful wife, he had a daughter, a nice house, you know, he had everything, and he threw it away.
The council have planted a tree in memory of Carol within sight of the house she shared with Sam, Patricia and Russell. He may soon be considered for parole. Sam has written to the Prime Minister objecting. Russell has never admitted guilt, never said where the body lies.
You tell me where my mother is, you allow me to bury my mother and to be able to put her somewhere where I know where she is, instead of a tree. My mother's been missing now for 25 years. And just because my father is convicted of my mother's murder, she still needs to be found. And I can't do anything about it. I can't change it. But just because it's 25 years doesn't mean to say that that it means any less.